Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Yahoo Finance Future Focus. Now, today we're joined by CEO and founder of Zodia Markets, Usman Ahmad, and we're going to be speaking about the impact that multiple spot Bitcoin ETFs could have on the cryptocurrency market. Usman, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ryan. Great to be here.
It's great to see you. Now, after the spot Bitcoin ETFs were approved, in the days following that, the market kind of played out. We saw a lot of volume on the first day, then it kind of tapered off. What are your projections? What's your prognosis for Bitcoin in the short term and in the long term?
Well, I mean, obviously the approval of the spot Bitcoin ETF was, I suppose, long anticipated. So what we saw in the aftermath of the approval was not only kind of the excitement and almost relief of the approval, and we saw the volume, as you indicated, flowing in. That's pretty normal in an asset class being approved. So an influx of volume initially and then tapering off, because ultimately the Bitcoin needs to be seeded as part of the ETF. But the interesting thing that many observers thought, it would be an accelerant to the price. Actually, what we saw was more of a sell-off in the price. So volumes have increased, but the price came off. Almost the classic, buy the rumor, sell the fact type approach. But what I think we'll see over the medium to longer term is a stabilization and long-term positive tailwinds for Bitcoin price action and volume activity going forward.
Okay, so we talked about Bitcoin, and of course there's other major digital assets like ETH. Now, ETH has been outperforming Bitcoin since the SEC approved spot Bitcoin ETFs. Why do we see this dynamic?
It touches upon my previous point, actually, where I think the market had priced in an approval. We've almost been anticipating it for quite some time, and the fact that there were 11 approved, or kind of all on the same day, was a huge fillip for the Bitcoin market. Actually, I think as soon as that happened, the market sentiment started looking at Ethereum as the next obvious asset that would potentially be wrapped in that ETF type wrapper. So I think we saw probably somewhere in the ballpark of a 10 to 12% price increase of Ethereum in the days following the Bitcoin approval, which for me, certainly, and for us in the industry, is a clear indicator that that's probably where we're looking next for an ETF to be approved.
Okay, so in the medium term, do we still see ETH outperforming Bitcoin?
It's difficult to say, because I think what we've seen is essentially with the ETF approval, there's potentially more demand and more with a legitimate wrapper, shall we say, that's now accessible to the mass market in the US in particular. They can start putting Bitcoin ETFs in their retirement funds. I think we'll see an uptick in interest and buying demand as a result. So I see Bitcoin performing and continuing to increase in price. But I think people are now going to be looking at ETH and going, is that next? And if so, when? And potentially, the likes of BlackRock and others, it's not just one ETF that they tend to look at. They tend to look at a lot. So maybe there's a spot ETH ETF, and maybe in the future we're going to have baskets of more underlying assets. So we'll see how that plays out. But I don't think it's a bad thing to look at the fact that people have now pivoted, or the market's now pivoted to look at ETH as a potentially increasing asset as well.
We're kind of looking at the high possibility of a rate pause at the end of January. What kind of catalyst will that have for the Bitcoin market and crypto in general? Well,
I think generally for the market more broadly. So if we zoom out even further from a macro perspective beyond just digital assets, a rate pause or a stabilization of rates, whether we're done on rate rises or not, I'm not sure, but a pause at least gives a degree of confidence. It potentially allows for people to plan a little bit further in their capital allocation strategy and look at how they're going to utilize the capital that they have. We've got to remember we've had a really rapid, relatively speaking, very rapid increase in rates over a very short period of time. And that's come off the back of 15 years of zero interest rates. So the market's had to readjust and has readjusted. And we're now seeing, we'll see, but a high likelihood of a pause means there's a little bit more stability. And for risk assets, of which I think Bitcoin and digital assets are, there's potentially more confidence in the ability to allocate into those asset classes.
Usman Ahmad, thank you very much for coming on this week's episode of Yahoo Finance Future Focus.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.